Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. I have finished reading The Burning God by R.F. Kuang, and so today I am reviewing The Burning God as well as the Poppy War Trilogy. And I'm going to put a link in the description below to my reviews of the Poppy War and the Dragon Republic. There will be first a non-spoiler assessment of the trilogy, and I will follow that with some spoilers for the trilogy as a whole in order to give specific examples of my mostly praise for the trilogy, but also a couple criticisms that I want to talk about. So let's start with those positives. And I want to begin with Rin. And really, this is a trilogy that begins and ends with its main character, Rin. And I think it's very important to say that this is a character who has been traumatized. She has been exploited. She has been betrayed. And that is something you need to keep in mind when you're assessing this character. She is not likable in the sense because she's been through all of that and she has an understanding of power. That is something that you go after in order not to be exploited and used and betrayed. And so that explains a lot of who she is. She is also just a very determined individual and somebody that I am alternately in awe of and admire, and also I'm horrified by, frankly, sometimes. And so it's a very interesting central character that R.F. Kuang has given us in Rin, and I absolutely love that aspect of this trilogy. I think that the story is pretty much driven by this main character, you have to say, and that's it done well. So absolutely praise to R.F. Kuang for her main character, Rin. Very well developed, interesting, conflicted, just you name it, this character really ticks off all the boxes for me. I also want to praise this trilogy for some of the secondary characters. Now, that's a little bit of a complicated point. I'll explain that a bit later, but really with some of the secondary characters, and not even secondary, really they're kind of major characters, but Rin is the show here. But some of the secondary characters, specifically, I would say Kite and Nija and Jiang and Alton and Venka to some degree. I really love what Kuang does with these characters, especially in relation to Rin. And I do have some issues with the use of secondary characters at points, but these characters are very nice, especially starting in Dragon Republic, very nicely fleshed out. And it is their relationship with Rin that really helps you to understand this character. So there's some really beautiful stuff. I'm going to talk some specifics later on, but it is a great thing for an author to make her main character come alive with strong relationships with the second tier characters. And that's also very well done in here. Another thing that I really admire about this trilogy would be the magic, the shamanism that Kuang brings in here. And it's very important to me in fantasy that there be consequences for magic. It should never be too easy. Characters should never get so much power that they can do anything they want. I find that boring, frankly. So magic needs to have consequences. There needs to be a price. And Kuang does this beautifully. She shows us the price to shamanism. And it includes opium addiction. It includes one's sanity is certainly going to be forfeit at some point or other. You should know that when you go to shaman school, you're going to eventually go insane. So it is just something that is really well done, beautifully incorporated into the story. And I just love the relationship that Kuang establishes between her shamans and their gods. It is a relationship of mutual exploitation as these shamans channel the gods in order to use their power, but the gods really want out. And so it's a kind of frightening thing, actually, and it is pulled off very well in the Poppy War Trilogy. And yet another thing that I really admire about this trilogy in this list of positives would be the incorporation of history and social critique. And there's just a really well done portrayal of oppression and war and the consequences of these things, the exploitation that takes place in these environments and the dehumanization that happens. This is just really well done in this trilogy. And in fact, you see the imperialism with the Muganese, you see the colonialism with the Hesperians, and you even see that within Nikon itself, there is a class hierarchy that is also a source of oppression. So it's all over the place. It's done in a complex way, in a compelling way. It is woven into the story really beautifully. It never is too heavy or anything like that. To me, I think it's just part of the story, a natural part. And Kuang does a great job with her social commentary in there. There are just these are ugly things that distort the people who perpetrate them and also the victims of them. So really beautifully done there as well. Now I want to talk about the criticisms here in a non-spoilery way first, before I get into some specifics, because I don't think it's fair to mention criticisms without giving specific examples to back them up. But first I'm going to just say in a general way, and I will warn you once again when I begin to talk spoilers. So one criticism, and this is a very minor one, frankly, and I've heard it said before, maybe some people don't mind this at all, but you have to be okay with a large number of F-bombs here in this story. Personally, I actually do not mind the use of that word at all in literature. I think a well-placed F-bomb is a great thing. It's an effective word. It's a word that people use. So why wouldn't it be used in writing? That said, I did not actually count, but I would not be surprised if the book averages one F-bomb per page. There are some pages that have 2 and even 3. I saw one page that had 3 on there. And so, there is not a word in the language that you would want to use so repeatedly, unless it's something like the or and something of that nature. Outside of those very common and unavoidable words, you don't want to repeat the word again and again and again. If I use the word, discombobulate on every page of my book, you would rightfully get frustrated with me and you would find it monotonous. And you would probably, it would definitely not be a helpful thing. So, yeah, to me, the word is overused. That's all I want to say about that. And it's not that I'm opposed to the use of the word at all. I think it's a very effective word. It's just don't overdo it, And so I think it's just overdone in order to make a character seem a little bit tougher or something like that. But for whatever reason, I don't think it's good to lean so heavily on a word like that. It becomes a crutch, and it becomes not just repetitious, but monotonous. So there you go. Other than that, I don't have any major problems with the prose. It's pretty straightforward, and it's very effective. So absolutely great job with the prose for the most part. Another criticism, though, that I had was more along the lines of the secondary characters in only the first book, really, where they were all just props, and it was really all about Rin. So in the Poppy War, that was definitely an issue. In the Dragon Republic, in Book 2, this was where I felt like Kuang started to really give us some good development of her secondary characters, and that certainly did continue in The Burning God. So that was an issue I was happy to see her address in the second book. And then there was my issue with a little too much exposition, and actually hurt, I think, the story in some ways. There was a point in the Dragon Republic, I mentioned this in my review of the Dragon Republic, where there was exposition in the beginning of a chapter telling us that the characters made it to their destination, and then it goes back and describes the journey, and you just took all the tension out of the journey by telling us that they already made it. So exposition, it's not something that you can completely avoid, but it is something you want to keep down to a minimum, I think. And so just a little bit too much of that in the series as a whole. And the last thing I want to say in terms of criticism in a general way, and then I'm going to go right into the specifics about it, and I'll give you a warning again, would be there's some narrative clunkiness here in the trilogy, in all 3 books, honestly. And what I mean by that is there is a tendency to present some really awesome moments, the kind of moments that you would see if this were a movie in a preview, right? So these are the things that just kind of like wow moments, and they're done really well. Those wow moments are done really well. The problem is that Kuang doesn't do enough to lead up to those moments. They are, in a sense, not earned. And I'm going to give you some specific examples to show you what I mean by that. And the narrative can take these abrupt turns because of that I think interfere a little bit, kicked me out of the story for a bit, honestly, here and there. And I'll give, again, some specifics in a moment. And then there's just a tendency for the plot to sometimes lurch around from one thing to another. And I think I can, a bit of, say it's a bit of narrative whiplash. And sometimes it can be a good thing, that can be strategic. Some people think that the abrupt transition in the Poppy War, the first book, from a kind of school setting, a magic school, the chosen one sort of starts to learn her craft kind of thing. And there's an abrupt transition from that to a war book. And so, some people like that and think it was sort of just deliberate to give you the sense of the suddenness of war. I felt like it was not quite so... it didn't work for me. Let's just put it that way. I didn't think it was that well done. And there are other moments in here I want to talk about, specifically from The Burning God, where I see this issue coming up, and it's something I saw in all three books. Okay, here is where I need to warn you about the spoilers. So if you don't want any spoilers, now is the time to leave. All right, and thank you for stopping by. So let's get into these specifics about my criticisms in terms of the narrative clunkiness. And I want to emphasize here that the positives definitely outweigh the negatives. I am a fan of the series and would certainly recommend it to fantasy fans, especially if you're interested in a very cool Asian-inspired setting. Definitely up for that. So it's just way more positive, but I do want to give some specifics about what I meant by narrative clunkiness. And the first is the death of Yin Viceroy. And if you recall from the Dragon Republic, Viceroy is Nija's father. He's the head of the Yin family, the head of the Dragon province, whose ambition is to have the Republic, etc., etc. And he exploits Rin, and he uses her in the Dragon Republic in a pretty vicious, brutal way. So he makes one appearance in The Burning God, and that is basically his death scene. And it is a cool moment. Like I said before, these are almost cinematic, moments that would make a preview if this were a movie, where Rin, kisses him and breathes fire into his lungs, and he disintegrates from the inside out with flame, and it's kind of like he gets his just deserves and all that. Great moment, but he just sort of literally is flown in for this one moment, and that's it. And there's no lead up to it, really. There is an explanation given to why he flies in. He likes to visit the troops every 2 weeks or something like that to give them a bit of a pep talk or whatever. But he's literally flown in just for his death scene. And it would have been much improved. This scene, nothing wrong with the scene itself, but there needed to be some lead up to it. And because there wasn't, it didn't feel earned. I did not feel really much at all when it happened because, who's that Viceroy? Oh yeah, Viceroy, right, from the second book. He just popped in to basically get knocked off by Rin, and that was about it. The second moment that it feels very much the same way, in fact, it's a little bit worse, and I'll explain why. It is the death of Petra, Sister Petra, of the Grey Company, who I'm sure you recall in the Dragon Republic was doing all kinds of nasty experiments on Rin in order to prove the superiority of the Hesperians, etc., etc. She's one of the colonizers, and a particularly odious one at that. So obviously, you would expect her death scene to be a moment of satisfaction for Rin and perhaps even the reader. But it wasn't for me, and it would have been if there had been, again, some kind of lead-up. Again, Petra just appears only for her death scene in the entire book. That's it. That's her only appearance. And even worse, okay, so in Viceroy's case, there was an explanation given why he was present. In the case of Petra, the Hesperians have all left. They have fled the city, and they are no longer there. There is no reason for her to be there, but for some reason we're never given, she is hiding out in the basement of some building, waiting for Rin. And you got to think, well, what was she thinking? What happened to her? Was she napping when everybody left and woke up and, oh crap, they're all gone. What do I do? There's never any explanation as to why Petra would be waiting there with her machine to get Rin. It doesn't make any sense. The only reason that scene is there, obviously, is to be a kick-ass moment for Rin when she gets her vengeance. And the moment itself is done really well, but there is no lead up to it. It does not feel earned. And that's a problem. You do want your major scenes like that to feel earned. The last scene I want to mention in The Burning God, where I feel there's some narrative, let's say, waffling, is where you have the demise of the Trifecta. And this is a moment where we've had this, in this case, there is a lead up. The problem is in the delivery, what happens. So there is this massive lead up to this scene where they're trekking through the mountains with an army, and you've got Jang, who's really kind of lost it here, and he's anticipating that this meeting with Riga is going to be, the end of the world kind of thing. And these, they're just, leading up to this moment, the army is starving, and they have to resort to eating corpses, and it's just this huge, big deal. And Riga is going to be, he was the former emperor, he's going to be this, huge presence, and he's going to beat back the Hesperians. And yes, there's going to be a big cost to it, but it's worth this, And of course, Daji is the one who's sort of motivated all of this, and Rin is going along with it. Okay, so we get to the location, Mount Tianshan, to this temple, and they get inside, and they wake up Riga, and he's there, and turns out to be, just like we anticipated, the world's biggest douchebag, but he's got a lot of power, and so on and so forth. But what happens? We had this huge lead up, we had these massive expectations built, and what happens is we're not really sure, because we never see what happens to the Trifecta. Rin has her guts beat out of her practically, her ribs broken, and who knows what else by Riga, who turns out to be just as nasty as you might have thought. And she is basically saved, and she leaps out of this temple onto the mountain to see the Hesperians attacking. And actually, she drew them there by putting up a column of fire. So this is the problem, because Rin then, to escape the oncoming, and by the way, the Hesperians come out of from her putting up the flame to the scene in like that. It was just kind of waiting and hovering there to come through the fog and somehow arrive just there. And somehow one of their dirigibles gets close enough to the mountain for Rin, who, by the way, has one hand and has had her ribs broken. Somehow she manages to leap out from the mountain, catch hold of one of these dirigibles, and not see what happens to the Trifecta, because she's knocked out. And so this is kind of a big letdown, and then they're gone. They're dead. That's the end of the Trifecta. We had this huge lead up and nothing. It reminds me a little bit of the scene in Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail, where they're going to go to Camelot. And there's this whole song and dance, right? And then afterwards, King Arthur says, on second thought, let's not go there. It's a silly place. That's kind of what happens here. It's like, let's not go there. It's a silly place. We get all this lead up to Riga, and we're expecting this big thing to happen, and then nothing. We don't even see what happened to them. I would have been at least satisfied if we had had the opportunity to see what happened to them. Later, when Rin meets up with Chagan, we're told that, yeah, they died in their encounter with the Hesperians. Chagan could sense it. What was Chagan doing there anyway, too, by the way, with a whole army that no one actually had detected until Rin walked over a hillside? Let's not get into that. Let's not get into how there's no way she could have held on to that dirigible with broken ribs in one hand. We won't even get into that. What most, I think, needed fixing was at least let us see what happens to the Trifecta. I'm okay with some ambiguity, but that's an awfully big thing that we've been led up to and then have had swept away from us. Like, nah, we're not going to go there. And so it goes somewhere else. So I had problems with that, but other than these moments of narrative clunkiness and the plot kind of lurching here and there, I really did enjoy this book. And the whole series as a whole, it really impressed me deeply. Especially, as I said, with Rin, from the moment of the first book when she gave herself a chemically induced hysterectomy, I knew, okay, this is one stubborn, determined character. And she had my admiration from that moment. And it just continued through the series. Even when she got a little bit, I don't know, sociopathic in parts. I mean, there was an honesty to that I admired. And I found myself, and even though I was a little creeped out by her, still kind of rooting for her. I also love where Kuang took her in the end. I found myself really admiring the end of The Burning God. I love what she does there, and it has a lot to do with the strength of the relationships and these major secondary characters like Kate and Nija. That scene at the end with Rin and Kate and Nija, brilliance. Really great stuff. Like I said before, there are some great iconic moments in this trilogy that I admire. And the relationship with Kate is very special and very interesting. And that moment of perceived betrayal at the end as Rin has gotten more and more paranoid, really well done. The relationship with Nija, very complex, very interesting, very well executed. There is, of course, an attraction from both of them. There is a repulsion. They are enemies. They are friends. They are, it's all there. It's really well done. I also liked the relationship with Jang. He is a very flawed mentor, and Rin's moment of forgiving him and also telling him he was a coward after his demise, very powerful, very good stuff. And Alton, really, for a character who dies at the end of the first book, he maintains a very important presence throughout the trilogy. He is in Rin's head. And what Kuang does with Rin and Alton, the relationship, if you will, I mean, obviously, you could say that Alton becomes an aspect of Rin's mind, that part of her that judges herself. And it's pretty harsh, but it's also really a fascinating psychological thing that Kuang does here. So really well done. I also enjoyed Rin's relationship with Venka. I thought that was well done, and I particularly don't mind the part at the end where it's not clear if Venka was the mole, if she was helping Nija or not. Rin, and confronts her in that really awful scene where Venka dies from the assassin's crossbow. It's a terrible scene, but it's really compelling and well done. And they had developed a very nice rapport, the two of them, before that. So, as I said before, the magic is really well done, beautifully done, and the incorporation of themes and social critique, all of that stuff, just beautifully done. There's a lot of great things to say about this trilogy, and particularly when you consider, the Poppy War was her debut novel. This is, she's still a relatively young author. I am definitely going to be interested to see where R.F. Kuang goes with her writing, and I will be picking up her next book whenever that comes out. I hope you enjoyed my discussion of the Poppy War Trilogy, and I will be doing another review very soon. In fact, I have already started reading the next book in the Dresden Files, Grave Peril. It's book 3. Having a blast with that already, so I'm looking forward to reviewing that one, and I'll be doing some other things, I'm sure, in the near future, and I hope to see you. Until next time.